All right, welcome back to season 3, Beneath the Helmet, everyone. I am your host, Arjuna George, former fire chief turned podcaster, author, coach, here to help you live your best life in the fire service. Today, I got a very special guest right across the world in a country that I'm very passionate about. I got my own relatives and family there. We are talking about the UK. So we got Ricky Nuttall, a firefighter from the London Fire Brigade, 18 years of service for London. And he's going to share a little bit about his journey going through the fire service in London, but also his experience in the Grenfell fires and kind of the trauma that impacted his life following those days, those very tragic days.
It's time to ignite your soul and unlock your full potential. Join us on Beneath the Helmet, the podcast exploring firefighters' health and wellness. Hosted by retired Fire Chief Arjuna George, our podcast is the perfect place to start your journey towards becoming the best version of yourself. So come on, let's join the conversation and find out what sets your soul on fire.
Oh, I'd love to welcome to the show, Ricky. Welcome.
Hi, thanks very much for having us on.
Sounds good. So, Ricky, tell our listener today a little bit about who Ricky is and kind of where you came from and maybe what drew you to the fire service to start with.
So my dad was at a young age, he signed up to the British military. He joined the Royal Electrical Mechanical Engineers, and he married my mum. They got married very young. I think they were engaged at 17, married at 18, which seems utterly crazy to me, but that's what the folks did back then. And so by the time my mum was 21, we were living in Northern Ireland. My dad was posted there for the Northern Ireland conflict that was going on in the 80s. There was quite a lot of civil unrest in the country at the time. So, he was regularly under fire and there would be terrorism bombs and all sorts of things going on. And that's where I was born. So I was born in Northern Ireland in a military hospital. We stayed there for about a year, I think it was, and then we moved to Cyprus. My dad got a posting in Cyprus. And that was just a wonderful place to spend my formative years. Really nice.
My dad was in the military, in the UK military in Cyprus.
Oh, no way.
Yeah.
Right, there you go. So we were in Dekelia, just near Limassol, I believe it is the base we were on. So we lived there for a while. Then my mum and dad began having problems. Again, age. My mum sadly had a miscarriage, and I think she was just a little bit too immature to be able to cope with it. Decided she wanted the support of immediate family and stuff. And whilst she had a good network of friends out in Cyprus through the military, it was all military based. So you couldn't escape the military. That was all you had. So at a point, she decided she was going to come back to the UK. She explained to my dad, I'm going. I understand you can't just walk away from the army, but I'm off. See you later. Packed up the stuff and we moved back to the UK. So they sort of to and froed a little bit. My dad bought himself out of the army early, tried to make things work, couldn't. My mum then met my stepdad, who was British Transport Police for he was a detective in the British Transport Police in London. And my dad also met a new partner. So things were going okay. Turns out that my stepdad had grown up in a very strict household. And whilst I couldn't understand this at the time, and it's taken me quite a long time to come to terms with the reality of this, my stepdad was parenting in a way where the only way he knew how, which was to be physically violent. So I grew up in a household where for 7 years it was filled with violence. I actually wrote a poem for the National Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children, the charity over here called the NSPCC. They're one of the biggest charities for children in the UK. And I wrote a poem called The Key in the Lock, which is about how I felt when I heard my stepdad's key go into the lock in the front door, and how I would have that thick feeling and, feel awful. So after some time, after about 7 years of this going on, it all sort of came out and my dad found out. And so overnight, we moved to London from Kent to go and live with my dad. That's me, my older brother, and my younger brother. So we had to start all over again. Yeah, we had to make brand new friends in a completely different type of, although it was only 60 miles from London, which to Canadians is, a walk to the shops effectively. But for us, that's the difference in accents and cultures and rules, like everything changes in 60 miles drastically as well. I went from a school where there was one Asian guy in the whole school to a school where I was one of 6 white people in the entire school. And that happened very quickly. So again, that school was very violent. My school in Kent, ironically, wasn't violent, but my home life was. I then went to a place in London where my home life wasn't violent, but my school was. So there was still lots of that going on. So I had to learn how to chameleon, what I call chameleon. I didn't lose myself, but I learned how to change my colors to fit in so that I wasn't being highlighted unnecessarily, so that I could just sort of blend in a little bit and try and, scrape through. Unfortunately, whilst my brain knew that was the right thing to do, my mouth has never let me be much of a chameleon. And so I would always invariably highlight myself at any given moment anyway. So it was sort of a bit of a fruitless exercise, but it worked to a point. And eventually I began my A-levels at school, which is, so in the UK until recently, when I was at school at least, you had to legally be at school till you're 16. At that point, you can leave school and get a job, or you can choose to do secondary education exams, which are called A-levels, which is what you need in order to go to university. So I began doing maths, physics, and English, and I wasn't particularly enjoying them. And I had a conversation with my dad one night where I said, look, I don't know if this is what I want to do anymore. And he said, well, if you're not going to go to university, there's no point doing A-levels because they are literally the stepping stones. That was his advice. I wouldn't say I agree with that. With hindsight, I certainly wouldn't give that advice to my kid. But nonetheless, that's the advice I got. So I ended up leaving school and just walking into a sort of a dead end, nothingy sort of job. And my mum reminded me around this time that when I was 3, I said to her, I believe a fire engine had driven past, and I said to her as a 3-year-old, I'm gonna drive that one day. And my mum says she remembers looking at me and feeling a little bit sad, because my mum had grown up in a world where your dreams don't come true. And she felt a little bit sad, and she said, oh, that would be lovely. That would be amazing. And in her head said, it's a real shame that's never going to happen. And she reminded me of this. And so as now an 18-year-old, I embarked on a journey of applying for 2 roles. One was London Fire Brigade, and one was the Royal Marines in the British military, commandos. So the applications ran concurrently. They ran next to each other. And I got to a point where I had the option of one or the other, and I chose the London Fire Brigade. I didn't like the idea with the military of being politically placed, where you're in a position where you might have to take a human being's life, and you might know that you probably shouldn't be there. And I thought, I can't be there doing that. Whereas the Fire Brigade is immediate reward. I get to make a direct difference to someone's life. I get to change someone's future. And I get to feel important and feel successful. And I get to be respected. And all of these things that I really, really wanted. And so I focused on the Fire Brigade. And it took me 4 years just to get an application form, because of how many people were applying for the roles at that time. And I eventually got my application form after 4 years of trying. And then it took a further 2 years to get through the application process before I actually made it to my very first day of training at our central London training school, which used to be at Southwark. So that's how I came to end up that first day in the training yard in Southwark. And that's a brief sort of rundown of my childhood history without sort of burrowing into it too deeply.
Thank you for sharing that. Do you think that the traumas you experienced in your childhood drew you to the fire service? Like there was a need within you that wanted to be filled by what you could get out of the fire service? Or what do you think the draw there is?
Yeah, I think there are actually a lot of studies now that that directly link people that work in service jobs, as in military, frontline workers, first responders. The people that do those jobs are people that have come from traumatic backgrounds, and I think it's quite closely linked to our need to say, I know how that terrible day feels. I need, not I want or I hope to, it's I need to be there when someone else is having that feeling, and I need to change it. I don't want to see other people feel how I felt in that situation. I want to help people. And I think people that come from traumatic backgrounds have a little bit of a hero's complex. Like I will be the person at any given time in any situation where, in fact, recently it happened, I was away snowboarding, and this couple had this big argument in a hotel lobby, obviously British, they were having a drunken argument in a lobby, and they had a kid with them who was about 17. And bless him, he ended up bearing in front of this like awful screaming and shouting and verbal abuse from the stepmom. And everyone else I was with is like, oh, let's just go to bed. Let's get out of the way. Let's let the hotel deal with it. And I couldn't. I thought, that these are hotel staff. They're not trained in this stuff. They don't know how to deal with these people. I've dealt with these people. Anyone who's worked in a fire service has had to stand there at some point and talk someone down off a ledge, sometimes literally, because you don't want them to do something stupid, or you don't want the situation to get worse. And you learn the skills you need, that innate calmness that washes over you in a situation where everyone else is getting less calm. You sort of just go, right, what do I need to do? So I thought, well, I'm going to invest my time in this, and I'm going to try and help. And it resulted in me sitting up until 4:30 a.m. with this kid, trying to give him some life lessons. Bearing in mind, I'm hammered drunk at the time. I've been out all night. So this is not me sitting there, saying the one thing once. I've probably repeated myself to the poor kid like multiple times. But there is definitely, even in those situations, even if it's not high stakes, I can't not help when there's an opportunity to help. I will, at the very least, I will stop and say, does anyone, this is who I am, this is what I can do. Does anyone need me? If you don't, I'll get in my car and I'll leave, or I'll walk off, or I'll go on with my day. But if you might need me, this is what I can do. This is how I can help. Please use me if you can. And so, yeah, I think my childhood, my schooling, all of that stuff definitely directly played into me wanting to be a firefighter. As a young kid, it was sirens and hero, all you get. It's an exciting job. As I got older, it became much more about wanting and needing to be that person that changes someone's life.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. That's kind of the trend that I'm seeing. And I haven't necessarily seen any stats on this yet or not, but I definitely kind of correlate that the people who join the fire service, who are attracted to the fire service, definitely have some traumatic history in their backgrounds and in their early childhood. And that's definitely reminiscing, and I can definitely see that more and more. So I just wanted to see if you concurred, and it sounds like you kind of can definitely relate to that as well. So
yeah, definitely. It's the same in the military as well. In fact, particularly with special forces, you tend to find that the people that are in the special forces, like the British SAS, if you look at their backgrounds, some of them have got criminal records. These are people that were, as kids, were troubled kids. They were probably the type of people you would look at and go, there is no way I'm ever teaching that person to fire a gun. And yet they're the people that we rely on in these extreme situations that are utterly heroic, because they've all, arguably got a little bit of a screw loose. They're all a little bit unstable and unhinged. And that's what you need in those situations. You don't need someone who's level-headed and calm and goes, well, the odds of me surviving this are 10%, so I'll stick this one out. You need someone that goes, 10%, better than 5, give me my gun. You know, that's what you need.
Yes. Well, Ricky, before we dive into the fateful day of 2017, I know you write a lot of poems. That's kind of a way you kind of share your story, your feelings, your emotions, everything you've gone through in the past. Would you be interested in sharing a poem with us today?
Sure. Yeah. The poem I share with people when I'm asked about this, unless it's a specific one requested, it is the one that sort of changed my direction in the wake of the Grenfell Tower fire. So it'd been a couple of weeks after the fire. I was struggling massively with sadness. I didn't at that point realize it was the beginnings of PTSD. I didn't realize I'd never had, mental ill health problems before. So I just remembered I'd started drinking quite a lot and I was feeling sad quite a lot. And the poem I'm going to read you ended up being made into a short film, which your listeners, your viewers can find online if they Google my name, Ricky Nuttall, and the tagline, The Firefighter. They'll find the short film comes up. It's like 2.5 minutes long. But you see that and that sort of started me off on this journey with contact with the press and the national media and going on TV shows and all of these things that people look at and go, wow, what a journey. But the reality is, when I wrote this poem, I was sat on the couch in my pants, staring at a wall, drunk, crying. That's the reality of where I was at the time. So I love this poem because whilst it conveys a lot of emotion about how I felt at the time, and whilst it proved to be the catalyst for much, much greater things for me in much further down the line, I'm always humbled when I remember the levels of sadness I felt at the actual time I wrote it. So I'll read it for you now. It's called The Firefighter, and it's specifically about my time on the night of the fire and then the subsequent days. I'm staring blankly. Frankly, I'm broken. My heart can't be mended, befriended, or woken. An emptiness consumes me, and in sorrow I'm soaked. My words can't be heard, as I'm strangled and choked. As tears stripe each cheek with a trail of sadness, my soul is stained black with the screams, with the madness. The pain of such tragedy, the waste of such life, the death of a husband, his children, his wife. The stairs were too many. My breaths were too few. My body exhausted, now mentally too. The silence of death, my smoke-stained hair, a hole in my soul that will never repair. The feeling of failure and pride that combine to leave me confused and abused in my mind. My lips wet with tears. I'm lost. There's no plan. Emotionally ruined. One broken man.
Wow. Kudos to you for holding it together, talking about that. That's made me kind of give me goosebumps, that's for sure.
Yeah, it's one of those things where I used that as a method of catharsis at the time, but I also used it as a method of torture. And whenever I felt sad, I would go, right, what can I listen to? What can I watch? What can I read that is going to punish me a little bit more? And so for some reason, and we laughed about it before we started recording, but for some reason, I cannot remember that poem word for word. And I think it's just almost a trauma response. I think my brain just says, we cannot have that inside. Have that outside, read that, but do not let that in, because, it was such a, we'll come on to talk about it, but it was such a horrendously painful time in my life where everything I knew about myself ceased to exist. And everything I knew about my life, my family, my friends, my home, everything changed. The things I found joy in changed. And that poem is synonymous with all of those times. So whilst I can read it now without breaking down. It is eight years nearly later, and it's taken that long to get to that point.
Beautiful. Well, that was an incredible poem. Thanks you for sharing that.
Thank you.
So I'd love to dive into maybe June 13th, the day prior to. What's the day in the life of Ricky? What was the day in life of Ricky on the 13th?
Well, we in the UK, in the UK and in London specifically, we run a shift pattern where we do 2 days followed by 2 nights, followed by 4 days off. So the 13th of June was the night of Grenfell. Obviously, it was gone midnight when the fire started, so it was technically the 14th of June, but it was actually our first night shift. So we've done our 2-day shifts already. We completed them. I couldn't tell you anything about them. There was nothing out of the ordinary. There was nothing special about them. And we reported for duty on the 13th of June like we would any other night shift. You turn up, you do roll call, you do your equipment checks, you do a quick inventory on the truck to make sure you've got everything you need. You do a bit of training, you have a bit of dinner, and we're all very lucky we get to go to bed at that point, and the government pay us. So, the night of Grenfell, couldn't tell you what I did that day, couldn't tell you anything interesting about the start of that shift, other than from when the call came in, which was what woke me up from bed.
So what was your first thoughts going through your mind when you heard the first call come in for this?
So we don't know. We know what truck is being called onto the shout in the UK. So the bells go down, and then I hear my truck ID. So I'm like, my truck call sign. So I'm like, right, it's us. So you do your normal stuff. You jump up, you grab your clothes, you chuck them on, you're down the pole. We're into the what we call a watch room, which is our sort of little downstairs office where everything is, and our call slip's printing out. Now, normally by the time you get there, it's finished. But on this occasion, it was still printing because there's a lot of resources going to the fire. So that's the first thing I noticed. Like, wow, why is that still printing? Saw the call slip off and saw that we were on make pumps 12. So there were 6 trucks there already. They've requested a further 6. Now, this is for a high-rise fire. So I can already tell from that alone. So I'm just putting that silent. So I can already tell from the resources being requested and the fact that this is a high-rise fire that we actually do have a fire. Because sometimes you'll get a predetermined attendance go to a high-rise fire because the smoke alarm's gone off, and they send a lot of trucks there just in case, because we've got the resources to do that in London. But to have 12 trucks going to a high-rise fire, that high-rise is actually on fire. So we've grabbed our fire gear, chucked the clothes on, jumped on the truck, and then we're pulling out the fire station. Now, at this point, as you all know, if you're a good firefighter, what you're thinking about is, what's my environment when I arrive? What equipment do I need to grab? What are my procedures? What are my policies? How do I keep safe? Who am I working with? How can I most effectively contribute towards this emergency scenario? So in London, we have a thing called an FSG, a Fire Survival Guidance Call. What that effectively means is if somebody is trapped in a building by the conditions of the fire, they're labelled an FSG, and it means that a member of our control staff will stay on the phone with them until that person is either rescued or they've died. We have between 8 and 15 members of control staff working in our control centre in London to cover 175 appliances and about 112 last time. Well, last time I was in, it was 112 stations before any new closures. So that's not a lot of people. And on the night of Grenfell, I believe there were 11 members of control staff. So if you have 2 fire survival guidance calls, you're then down to 9 members of control staff. If you have another 2, you're down to 7. And very quickly, bearing in mind, the Grenfell Tower fire is one incident happening. There are still all of the others happening across London. It's a busy call centre. So bear that in mind. 11 members of control staff. The next radio message I heard was there are 156 fire survival guidance calls in progress. Now, immediately I thought I'd misheard. And then when I realized I hadn't, I thought, well, how can they be fire survival guidance calls? We don't have enough staff. And I came to learn that very, very quickly at that incident, our control centre was farming calls out to other control centres from the other fire and rescue services across the UK. So you've got people sitting in control centres with none of the information that London Fire Brigade has, trying to make judgment calls on whether they're telling someone to try and self-rescue or not. You know, it was utterly impossible. So when I heard that, and then another radio message came over straight after saying, this is now Make Pumps 20 fire. So we're not even there yet. And they've requested another 8 on top of the other 6, on top of the 6 that are there. So I'm now going, well, A, this fire is changing rapidly. This is a quickly developing fire for them to be over-resourcing a job like they are. And obviously with the amount of FSG calls coming in, I realized at that point, people are going to die. There is no way around that. Doesn't matter how good we are at our jobs. We do not have those resources. If those numbers are accurate, we cannot save that many people. So people are going to die. And it's a weird place to be, knowing that that's the case, when you're not even outside the building yet. You know, you're still on your way there. It's dark, it's nighttime. It was a summer's evening, so it's quite warm out. You've got your blue lights flashing and lighting up the houses around you and all the streets and stuff as you go, and the sirens bouncing off buildings, and all you're thinking is, shit, people are going to die. And then you go back to, how do I limit that? What can I do when I arrive that's going to prevent some of those people dying? And that's the problem. It becomes a damage limitation exercise rather than an exercise in saving people. So when we first arrived at the tower, I looked up at the building and you can see flames going from the 4th floor up to the 24th floor, which was the top floor, and then back down again to about the 15th floor in a triangular pattern. And I'm looking at this and going, this is not how tower blocks burn. You know, as you know, you would expect to find fire in 1, 2, or 3 windows, and they'll be grouped together. You know, sometimes that's internal fire spread. Sometimes if the wind conditions are right, windows are open, the fire can jump up a floor into a window directly above it or directly below it if debris is falling. But you don't get a flat on the left side of the building on the 4th floor and a flat on the right side of the building on the 15th floor, both on fire at the same time. That's crazy. And it was in that moment that we realized there was a big problem. And again, you know, none of us could have even guessed at how big a problem was unfolding in front of us. But you don't understand what's going on. And so you say, right, well, let's deal with what, you know, and I say to people all the time now, don't worry about the things you can't control. Don't try and control the things you can't control. Try and control the things you can. Take power over the things you can control. So I said, right, well, what I can do is I can get my BA set and I can get that on my back. I can get to the entry control point. I can speak to the entry control officer and I can find out where it is they want me and I can start saving people. So my friend, Leon, my colleague, and I, we made our way into the building, up into the lobby area. And our first task was to rescue a man from the 15th floor who's on a fire survival guidance call. So we know at that point, if we don't rescue him, he's almost certainly going to die. So it's on us, first of all. Secondly, I'm thinking about my air and I'm thinking, how much air do I have? We're going to have to be under air. I don't know what you do in Canada. I know the States are a little bit, well, I probably shouldn't say gung-ho in case you have the same procedures, but I know they'll go into a fire without being under air and then put their air on when they need it. Yes. In London, in London, we don't do that. In London, before we go into a smoke-filled area, we are masks on and we're under air. Advantages of that, we don't take any, what I would call unnecessary risks with our own safety. There's no chance of being hit on the head and suffocating because you can't get your BA mask on if you're unconscious. Equally, the problems with that is you use more air before you're anywhere near where you need to be. And so I know at this point, with a standard duration breathing apparatus there, I know that I probably don't have enough air to get to the 15th floor, rescue somebody, and get back out again. So I'm now thinking, well, what do I do then? Do I say to the person at the entry control point, oh, we can't do that. We won't have enough air. Or do I, knowing that I don't have enough air, say, no problems, let's go. Knowing that I may not come out the building. And, you know, I think your listeners, anyone that's served anyway, will say, well, there's only one answer in that scenario. There's only ever one answer in that scenario. We're going in, whether I've got enough air or not. But it was a weird place to be, because it's the first time in my career I'd ever gone into a fire situation knowing that I don't have enough air, or certainly being fairly sure I don't have enough air, feeling like I'm not going to come out again, having no water to fight to firefight on the way, and knowing that there is fire on every single floor that I'm going to be making my way through up to the 15th, and that by the time I come out, those fires will be worse.
Ish.
Yeah, it's not a good place to be.
No.
And so there we are, entry control point, and we pick up a length of rolled hose, and they said, hopefully you'll have water on the 15th floor. Hopefully you'll have water on the 15th floor. So we have dry risers in our tallest buildings in the UK. I don't know if it's the same in Canada. So effectively a drain pipe in a building. We plug a hose from the back of a truck in on the ground floor, pump water into it. It goes to the height of the building, and on either every floor or every other floor, there'll be an outlet where you can connect your hose, charge your hose, and then you're ready to firefight.
Yep,
similar, cool. So obviously 15th floor, there's firefighting operations taking place on every floor below us. How much water pressure are we going to get on the 15th floor, if any?
Not good.
Yeah, so not good. So I'm thinking all of these things, and I'm thinking we're going to carry this length of hose with us, as well as the weight of our BA set, as well as the 20 kilogram, what we call an enforcer, a door smasher, the big yellow key as it's fondly known, and a thermal imaging camera, the branch for the hose, all told, me and Leon are carrying an additional 50 kilograms of weight each. And we're going through extreme heat on each floor. And we don't even know if when we get there, we're going to have water. Now, when you consider that our procedures are, because smoke is like petrol effectively, right? Unburned fire gases. So if they're at the right ignition temperature and you introduce a flame, they ignite. So our procedures are, if you're in a smoke-filled room, whether there's fire or not, you pulse spray the gases to cool them down, so that if a flame is introduced, they can't ignite. So you don't have a flashover or a fire gas explosion. So again, we've got a length of rolled hose, and we know we're going through every floor filled with these gases. And when I say it was hot, it was hot. And the journey up to the 15th floor was filled with hose everywhere, firefighters coming in and out of buildings. You can barely see anything. There's shouting, there's calling out. It's carnage. And in amongst all of this carnage, the middle of the hose had got tangled and spilled out. So I've now got a bundle of this tangled hose in my arms. Leon's got a bundle of this tangled hose in his arms. And we're trying to sort of walk side by side in this narrow stairwell with no visibility. We now don't know what floor we're on. And it's at that point we realise the emergency lighting has been fitted over the floor numbers. So we can't see what floor we're on. We're wiping the walls. We can't see what floor we're on. So we had to come off of the stairwell, the protected stairwell, or mildly protected because the smoke vents failed, but mildly protected stairwell, onto a corridor, a landing area that's filled with fire, and start trying to see door numbers on flats so that we can guess what floor we're on. If there's 8 flats on each floor and this is, the 10th floor, that this is flat 80, we're on the 10th floor. and then find our way back onto the stairwell. We had to do that twice. And again, this is using up valuable air every time we're doing this. And by the time we made it to the 15th floor, we were pretty exhausted. And it doesn't seem like a long way, you know, 11 floors, 22 flights of stairs. But with an additional 50 kilos of weight, and with your adrenaline surging, and with all of that heat, and the fear that's in you at this point as well, you know, your heart is thumping through your chest. And we got there, and I suddenly realized that sitting in the lobby area of the 15th floor, I suddenly realized that it was completely silent. I couldn't hear crackle of fire. There was no more shouting. The radio that was in my left ear had failed at this point. I don't know whether we just lost signal or whether the comm system had actually failed. So I've got no contact with anyone on the outside at this point. And we knelt down on the floor, and I've looked at Leon and I've said to him, and again, you're in thick black smoke, so you're shouting through your mask. And I've said to him, we need to find the dry riser. It's really hot here. We've got to get water on this smoke. So he went off with the end of the hose, and I'm now left on my own. And again, that deafening silence sort of really is so imposing in that scenario. And it was in that moment I realized that me and Leon are probably the two highest up in that building at that time in terms of firefighters. And we really did feel very lonely. The next thing I remember is feeling this growing, painful sensation in my wrists and the back of my neck. And I realized that I was starting to burn just from the heat, you know, not from direct fire. There's no direct fire. And I thought, wow, it's really hot. So I picked up the thermal imaging camera and I did a quick scan. And in the lobby area at floor level, I was on my knees, bear in mind, at floor level, it was 550 degrees Celsius. And I realized at that point, we don't have much time. And if it's 550 at floor level, it's in excess of 1,000 degrees at ceiling height. I was like, this is a bad spot to be. And so with this silence and with this burning, I thought, I've got to get this hose untangled, because if we can't get water on this smoke, we can't cool the temperature down. So I've started to sort of find a loop in the hose and then pass the hose through and, you know, untangle it like this. And I think it took 3 or 4 loops to get this hose untangled. And just as I got to the last little loop, things started to feel like they were improving slightly. Like the hose is untangled, but, you know, we're going to be all right. We'll get some water on the smoke. We'll cool the temperature down. We'll rescue the guy. We'll get out. It's all going to be okay. And at that moment, my emergency whistle went off to let me know I was running low on air. So generally, the low pressure warning whistle goes off when we've got about, I think it was between 75 and 85 bar of pressure left in your BA set. So we got about 10 minutes, give or take, if you're not working particularly hard. Well, I haven't even got a branch on the nozzle on the end of the hose yet. We've not even started gas cooling. I haven't even considered opening the door to this flat yet. How are we going to do this? And I realized that I'm probably not going to get out now. I haven't got enough. Unless I run now, I'm not going to get out of this building. We've got so much to do still. And it's that moment it sort of hits you and you sort of think, shit, I'm going to die. I'm actually going to die. And then your preservation brain kicks in and you go, right, what can I do? What can I change? What can I control in this situation? I'd got the last knot undone already. I connected the branch, and then I thought, I can connect my set to Leon's auxiliary hose on his BA set, and I can supplement his air. And just as I thought that, his whistle went off. I could hear it from down the corridor. And that glimmer of hope disappeared very, very quickly. And I thought, we're both going to die. You know, we are screwed here. He turned the water on. I felt the hose fill up. Put it on a wide cone from the branch, and I sprayed a couple of pulses up to the ceiling, cooled the gases down, brought the temperature down to very quickly, down to about 350 degrees Celsius. You're now in a livable environment. You know, the burning stops and you realize, right, I don't have to worry about that now. The smoke isn't going to ignite now. You've got that whistle going off still. That's reminding you you're going to die, you're going to die, you're going to die. And we're outside the door of this flat. And I looked at Leon and he looked at me and we said, what are we going to do? And we weighed things up. It felt like forever, but realistically, it's probably 2 or 3 seconds where we've gone, he's not going to be able to breathe. If he's alive, if he's the other side of that door and he's even alive, he won't be able to breathe. He's going to be unconscious within 2 breaths. So he's going to be a dead weight. That's going to massively slow us down getting out. We're on our whistles. Even if he was able to hold his breath, he's in 350-degree heat. You know, you're cooking a chicken in an oven at 220. He's at 350. It's an unsurvivable environment for more than a few seconds. And we've got to get down 22 flights of stairs where the smoke vents have failed and it's filled with smoke. And there's hose everywhere. And he's not going to be able to see. And our minds then go to hierarchy of rescue. Who's the most important person at any fire? Well, that's me. Because if I become involved and need rescuing, firefighters in the near vicinity will abandon what they're doing and they're going to come to me. That means more people die. You know, if we don't prioritize ourselves at this point, we're not going to have another chance to come in and rescue somebody else. And it's an awful, awful, awful decision to have to make. And the only time I've had to do it in my career where I've had to choose to let someone die. And it was hard to process when you consider that effectively I was choosing to let someone die so that I could live. And that feels very cowardly, even though it was absolutely the right decision. It was in accordance with all of our health and safety policies and yada, yada, et cetera, et cetera. It was the right thing to do. And on that night, Leon and I managed to go back in another 2 times, you know, and we managed to rescue people and help and help rescue people, which I wouldn't have been able to do if I'd have, you know, tried to be a hero and died. Problem is, whether the logic kicks in or not, my brain just began screaming at me, coward, coward, coward. I felt ashamed and I felt guilty. And when I say me and Leon got out of that building by the skin of our teeth, like we literally were throwing ourselves down flights of stairs. And as I reached round to get my cylinder valve on my back, as I reached round to turn it off, my mask stuck to my face and I was out of air. If I'd spent another 10 seconds, that would have happened whilst I was running down the stairs and I might not be here now.
Wow. Yeah, you wouldn't be here. Leon wouldn't be here. The person you were trying to rescue wouldn't be here. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. What a incredible fire. Wow.
The problem I had, you know, that was the start of my battle with poor mental health. But it was only the start, because I was part of a specialist rescue team, and 2 days after the fire, so we had that night shift. We left there the next day at 2 p.m. So we arrived just before 1 a.m. Left there at 2 p.m. We'd been on duty for 20 hours straight, and then we finally went off duty at 4 p.m. and we were back on duty at 8 p.m. the same night. So we literally, none of us went home. We went off duty at 4 p.m. and we were back on duty 4 hours later. And that night was unremarkable. Nothing really happened. We had a couple of shouts, we had a few bits and pieces, you know, nothing else really. And Grenfell's still going on. So we were busy, but busy with all the bits and pieces. They weren't going to send us back to Grenfell. But because I was part of a specialist rescue team, 2 days after, so my second day off after my last night shift, I was recalled back to Grenfell to help the police with body recovery. And then, you know, you get to go to every floor, every room, every dead person. 72 people died. And there were corners of rooms where there were 8, 9, 10 people crowded together that had died. And the problem with seeing these things is that the pictures you see, and I don't really talk about them because I'm always worried that maybe some of the survivors' families might hear or see, and, you know, people need to make their peace with what happened. So I don't go into specifics of what I saw, but what I saw tells you a very clear story, gives you a very clear indication of that person's or those people's final moments. And that haunted me. And, you know, as I said earlier, before I read the poem, you know, within a couple of weeks of fire, I was in a mess. But having never suffered with poor mental health before, I had absolutely no idea what was going on. All I knew is that I was really sad, and I'd started to cry a lot, and I'd become irrationally angry at things. You know, like any small thing that took place that normally I'd be like, oh. Instead, now I'm flying into a violent verbal rage. And I was scared because I knew something was wrong, but I didn't know what. I didn't know how to fix it. I didn't know where to start. If you don't know what something is, you haven't got the first clue of how to start fixing it. And for someone with a hero complex who's always making it his business to fix everything, to suddenly be plunged into a place where you're broken and you can't fix yourself, you feel helpless and hopeless.
Ricky, wow, what an incredible story. Was there any firefighters injured? I'm assuming so. Was there firefighters injured, or did any perish?
Remarkably, no firefighters died. A couple were taken to hospital with very minor injuries, you know, a bit of smoke inhalation or a minor burn, things like that, but very, very few. We're very proud of our safety record in the UK generally, and in London Fire Brigade particularly. Does that mean sometimes situations are a little bit more convoluted than we would like? Yeah, definitely. But it keeps us safe and means we get to go home to our families. And that, you know, my number one goal when I'm at work has been make it home.
What was the support like for all the firefighters that responded to this incident? Was there a lot of support for mental health, or is that something that's kind of transitioned and grown since then?
It's definitely something that has grown since then. I would argue it hasn't grown nearly enough or nearly fast enough. But we had our chief at the time, Danny Cotton. She was a brilliant leader, and she said within days of the fire, there is going to be a big mental health fallout, and we need to be supporting and helping our firefighters. Unfortunately, due to government cutbacks, you know, our counselling team had been slashed from 7 to 3 or something, I think, at the time. So you've suddenly got, you know, a whole host of firefighters that need to go and speak to someone and get support and help. And there's no one available. You know, you're on a waiting list. Now, I was very lucky in that by the time I realized I needed help, which was probably a good couple of months after the fire, I was seen fairly quickly. But the first thing I was told when I walked through the doors was you have 15 sessions. Each session's an hour long, and you've got a maximum of 15 sessions. So that's the equivalent of saying to someone, you've got childhood trauma, you've got all of the trauma from your job that you've never addressed up until Grenfell, then you've got the trauma from Grenfell, added to the fact that your son's now scared of you, your partner no longer loves you and wants you to move out, you're losing your home, you've developed a drink problem, and you've started using cocaine. And we're going to give you 15 hours to work all of that out.
Don't feel very promising, does it?
No. And so what I did was I tried to shortcut. I only spoke about the things that I thought were relevant. I'm not a trained counselor, you know? It was like the blind leading the blind, effectively, you know. And my counselor was amazing. He was such a lovely person, and he tried as hard as he could to help me. But unless you're going to go to counselling and be completely 100% honest with the person you're talking to, don't waste their time. Let someone else go. Let someone else have that spot who is going to be 100% honest, because they deserve it more than you, frankly. I was not in a position, as a currently serving firefighter, I was not in a position where I felt I could turn around to a counsellor who worked for the London Fire Brigade and say, yeah, I'm an alcoholic now. I drink, drive to work sometimes, and I use cocaine whilst I'm on duty. Because I thought, well, they'll just sack me. So I can't tell him that. He has a duty of care for public safety. So if I tell him that, he's going to tell the fire brigade. So I'm going to have to leave all of that out. And what my counselling sessions became was a bitching session of me about my then partner, you know, the mother of my child. And it was only, you know, quite a few years later that I really understood that I'd put her in a position where my son had become scared of me. She had become scared of me. Whilst there was no physical violence regarding my ex-partner, there were some instances with my son where I lost my temper and smacked him really hard. And, you know, he was fearful of me because of those moments. And that the hitting aside, I would scream at him. I'd swear at him. He was 4 years old. He became petrified of me, and I became my stepdad. I turned into the man that I hated the most in life. And so my partner was not in a position where she could support me. She was in a position where she had to choose to support me at the expense of our son, or support our son at my expense. And any mother worth their salt is going to pick the child. How could you pick anything else? But that led to me feeling abandoned and deserted at the time when I most needed her, which led to more anger. And so that sort of downward spiral continues, you know. And soon enough, my sessions came to an end. And I remember sitting there with my counsellor, and he said, "It's the end of the session. How do you feel?" And I went, "Honestly, thank you so much. I am great. I'm fantastic." And he went, "Brilliant." And I walked out, and I went straight to the pub, and I drank about 6 or 7 pints of beer, got absolutely smashed, and then wrote a poem called The Darkness, which is this sort of depressing tale about a very emotionally connected poem of how it felt to be suffering with depression and PTSD, how isolated you feel, how dark the world feels, and how hopeless everything feels. And it, you know, it wasn't long after that last session it was before my partner had asked me to move out, but I had my low moment where I'd been going to counselling and it wasn't doing quite enough. And I got up off the couch one day and I went to go and get a glass of water. And I sort of just slumped to the floor and I started crying again. Only this time the crying felt different. I realised that I wasn't going to stop. I realised that crying that had just started was just going to continue. And then I realised that this sadness inside me was never going to leave me. And then your brain sort of goes, well, that means I'm going to feel like this for the rest of my life. Well, if I'm going to feel like this for the rest of my life, why would I want to live the rest of my life? This is miserable. I wouldn't choose this. And then you go, well, if I don't want to live the rest of my life, then there's only one answer. And so, you know, I'm sat there in this dismal sort of wintry afternoon, very little light in the room, and I'm thinking about killing myself. And not because I didn't feel like I had any value, not because I didn't have self-worth, not because I didn't think I was loved, not because I thought, you know, people hated me or wanted me dead. All of the things that I thought, these are the reasons people killed themselves over, none of them were true for me. I had a great network around me. I felt loved. I felt abandoned by my girlfriend at the time, I'm sure, but I didn't have self-worth issues. I didn't have value issues. I just needed to escape how painful the sadness was. And that's all it is. And it's so scary. And the reason I use sadness and sad quite a lot is because it's quite a juvenile word. You know, sad is the sort of way you describe unhappiness when you're a kid. But there's no better word to describe the feeling that I had inside me other than sadness. It was woeful. And in that moment, sat there crying, thinking I'm going to have to kill myself to escape this pain. Something happened in my brain. That little survival button kicks in. And I just thought, I'm going to call my dad. And for anyone watching or listening, I want to make this so vitally clear to people. I made 3 phone calls from the floor that morning. 3 phone calls. One to my dad, one to my mum, and one to the partner that was withdrawing from me. And all 3 people picked the phone up. Wow. Saved my life. Without a shadow of a doubt, that saved my life. If all 3 people hadn't picked up, or maybe if only one had or one hadn't, again, maybe we wouldn't be having this conversation. It was the fact that all 3 people answered and all 3 people sat with me in my moment of pain, and all 3 people said, go to the doctors. You need more help. And I phoned up my doctor and I explained what was going on, and they said, come in immediately. And I went in immediately. And how I describe this to people is, pre-counselling, I felt like I was trapped in a dark room. No doors, no windows, no light. You're just in the darkness. That's not going anywhere. You can't change it. There's no way. There's no hope. Having counselling was like someone cutting in a skylight in the roof and now some light's coming in. So I've got something I didn't have before now. I've got a little bit of hope because I can see a way out. That's what the counselling did. Unfortunately, I couldn't reach the skylight. It was out of reach. It was too far. So it's almost a bit frustrating. You're doing the right things. You've got your little bit of hope, but you can't reach it. Going to the doctors that day and being prescribed antidepressants was like someone lowered in a footstool. Now, not only can I see a way out, but I can reach it. And whilst it was still hard work, dragging my arse out of that room, hauling myself up from this little footstool, it gave me a tangible escape for the very first time. And the reason I talk about antidepressants at this point is because I know that there is a huge thing, a huge taboo with antidepressants with people in the UK. And I don't know if it's the same in the States. It seems to be, it's almost fashionable to be on them. So when I say States, I shouldn't say the States, all of America.
Yes.
Canada, Canada, yeah. America, the continent. Yes. There's this, you're sort of one or the other. You're either on it because it's a bit fashionable, or you're on them and feeling ashamed of being on them. And so I want to point out to people that I went on them, and the difference it made to me in my immediate future looked brighter because I was on those antidepressants. Now, admittedly, very, very quickly, I found a herbal, natural alternative that seemingly perform the same task, and that's something called St. John's Wort.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And I now use St. John's Wort every winter. I suffer a little bit with seasonal affective disorder. You know, in the UK is a gloomy place when the sun's not shining, and the sun's not often shining. But in the winter months, when it's dark, you know, it'll be dark until 8 a.m. and it's dark again at 2:30 p.m. You know, you've got a very short window of light, and it gets miserable. And so now, from about October every year, I just take a St. John's Wort, one a day throughout the winter period, stop again in sort of like March, end of March, so that it just keeps my mind feeling a bit light. And as I said, it's a herbal remedy, so I don't feel like it's, you know, there's no addictive qualities with it. And I just do that as a matter of course now. And this year is the first year that I haven't, and I felt okay.
Oh wow, that's great news.
Which is brilliant news, really, really good news, because you know there are a lot of happy things going on in my life now, and I speak about those times, those years, because they're so important in helping shape who I am now, and so important in helping shape the career that I'm sort of carving out now in the speaking arena. But it's also really nice to remember just how far I've come from where I was in terms of my recovery.
Well, I love that you reflect on that, because a lot of people that I either coach or talk to on the podcast forget about those times, and they just kind of relate to how they feel today, and they don't necessarily celebrate the success of their recovery, because recovery is a huge pat on the back, right? When you can bring yourself from lying on the floor calling your best 3 people in your life to what you're doing today, that deserves kudos to you, right?
Yeah. And you know, generally, especially men in our kind of previous roles, we are awful at congratulating ourselves. It feels horrible. It feels weird. And when other people congratulate us, we hate it, and we get emotional. We're, oh, shut up. I'll just do my job. You know, don't ever call me a hero. Oh my God, awful. You know, we hate it. But the reality is that is what we are to some people. To some people, we're a hero, you know? And I think it's important that we're very quick to beat ourselves up when we get things wrong. We're very quick to be our harshest critics. And we're very ready to listen to other people criticizing us. Oh, you could have done that better. Yep. Thanks. Thank you. Thank you for pointing that out. I needed you to tell me that I'm a little bit rubbish so that I can work harder and get better. Cool. So why are we not patting ourselves on the back? Why are we not celebrating, saying, do you know what I've done this year? I've drunk less. That is a massive achievement. Smashing life. I'm going to tell everyone, and I want everyone to say, well done. You know, you're not an alcoholic anymore. Good for you. It might be a non-event to some people. It might be something that other people do with ease and have, you know, never been an alcoholic. Great, but that's not my life. And what I've realized is post Grenfell, literally the day after the fire, I had become a different person. And what I was doing is I was spending my time trying to get back to that timeline before Grenfell, the other side of that wall, that event that's now there. I'm trying to get over that and back to who I was before. And I spent so long trying to get back to who I was before, I'd forgotten that my next adventure was learning who I am now.
Love it. Yeah.
And that's, you know, that's the advice I give to people now. What an adventure. We literally grow up from the day we're born. Every day is something new. Every day is an adventure. And we love learning about ourselves and challenging ourselves. And we think that we get to 18 or 21 or, you know, 25, whenever it is, you decide you're an adult. And we go, I'm finished. No, you're not. You're potentially a quarter of the way into discovering who you are. Every single day is a discovery of who you are, a further discovery. And I had the unique position, I was in a unique position to be able to look and go, well, none of those things are true for me anymore. So who am I now? Let's work that out. And it's since I've spent time investing in myself and working out who I am now that I've been able to help so many other people along the way just by talking about what I've learned about myself.
So who is Ricky today?
Well, who is Ricky today? Very good question. So I run my own company now called Just Rick. Justrick.co.uk is the website. And I go into schools, prisons, emergency services, any environment, private companies as well, any environment where I feel or they feel like I have something to offer in terms of either helping people overcome trauma, giving people tools. Sometimes it's literally just a cautionary tale. My job is to go in and tell you how badly I mess things up and what things looked, felt, and smelt like at the time, so that you might see one of those signs and go, oh, that's the start. That's the start of that for me. Do I want to go on that same journey as that dude? No, I do not. So what can I change? What can I change now? How do I intervene now? And the answer is always the same: talk, counselling, whatever it is it looks like for you, whatever your trauma is, whatever the problem is. As soon as you start dealing with it, you're halfway to fixing it instantly. As soon as you start dealing with it, the hardest thing is to accept that there is a problem and make the brave step to start talking about what the problem is. It's hard because you feel weak and you feel useless. But the reality is, asking for help. I'm going to coin a phrase here, and it's a cheesy one, but it's the best one for this. Asking for help isn't giving up. It's showing you're not going to give up.
Like that. Yep.
So
on your website, you have a word. Well, not necessarily a word, a phrase. Strength is in vulnerability. And to me, it's kind of like resilience. How would you describe that, strength and vulnerability? Because I think that's what you're doing now, is showing vulnerability and the strength of what that is, right? So
it's kind of, to really put it simply, it's kind of the Eminem approach to life. At the end of 8 Mile, Eminem's there and he says everything that the other guy is going to say, but he says it first. And then he throws in the mic and says, what you got? And that, to me, is what strength in vulnerability is. You talk about the things that people could use to hurt you. You talk about the things that you use to hurt yourself. You put them all out there and they lose the power. And so in showing that vulnerability, what you gain is strength, because you become harder to attack, harder to defeat. And that's when, a lot of people think of this as an external problem. This is largely an internal problem. We beat ourselves up. We attack ourselves. If I can stand on the stage in front of 600 strangers and say, I once smacked my son so hard that out of fear he wet himself, people in that room are going to say, why would you tell us that? That is shameful. That is horrific. That's horrendous. You should be in jail. Yeah, I agree. It's not a boast. I'm telling you because I'm ashamed of it. I'm telling you so that you can look at me and say, wow, this guy has just told us the thing he's most ashamed of is in his entire life. And he's done it so that we won't make the same mistakes he did. I'm actually going to sit here and I'm going to listen.
Yeah, exactly. Wow, what a journey you've had, my friend. What a journey you've had. What would you say is one kind of element of your life that's really turned your life around? Like, has there been some modality, some practice that you've taken on, some tools, some practices that you do for yourself, and like your self-care, anything that's kind of really sticking out for you?
Yeah, so there are a few things. I think it's important to realize that hitting the bottom is not an overnight thing. It's a downward spiral. Hitting the top has to be the same. Anyone out there that's medically trained will know if you cool down quickly, you have to heat up quickly. If you cool down slowly, you have to heat up slowly, or your body shuts down. Your body has other problems. So you can't expect to be okay 1 minute, then 3 months later be at the bottom of this awful spiral, and then go to 4 counselling sessions and be back to square one. It's not how it works. It's a minimum 3 months to get back. And I would probably say double any amount of time it takes you to hit the bottom, double that amount of time to get back to where you want to be. because the journey through recovery is painful. Sometimes it's more painful than the fall to the bottom, because you have to confront so much within yourself. But the beauty about this upward spiral is that the choices you make start to kind of like dropping a stone into a pond. The ripples go out and they keep going out. And if you drop another stone next to it, those ripples start to overlap, and another stone next to that. And before you know it, you can cover a whole pond with ripples in one time if you throw enough stones in next to each other. And so I started off with simple things in terms of recovering. Anytime I started to feel sad, I would just stop drinking alcohol. Straight away, that's it. I'm now teetotal. I didn't give myself a time frame. I didn't say it will be for tonight, or it's until next week, or until that party. I just said I no longer drink, until I felt I was in a place emotionally, mentally, where I could say, if I started drinking now, would I end up at the bottom of a bottle of Jack Daniels? Or would I have 3 glasses of JD and Diet Coke and then be like, I'm happy? Depending on the answer would depend on when I start drinking again, or when I allow alcohol to come back in. Obviously going for counselling, antidepressants, doing all of the hard bits, the big things that you need to start to recover. Self-reflection was always a big thing. When I felt something, rather than just going, oh my God, I feel sad, and then crying, I would think about why. Why is the most important question you'll ever ask yourself in any situation at any time. You're about to do something stupid. Why? You're about to do something creative. Why? You're about to see a counsellor. Why? What is your why? What is the why in your situation? So I would ask myself, right, I'm feeling sad. Why? What's the date? What's the time? Is that relevant? Because trauma has a watermark, leaves a watermark every 14th of June. And I didn't realize this for the first few years, but the first couple of years, I had an absolute meltdown at the exact time we were called to Grenfell. And I felt fine all day. The exact same time. It's like my body was keeping track of what the time and date was, but impeccably, like perfectly. And so you have to ask yourself, why am I reacting this way to this thing? Why did I react so angrily to that very small thing? So that's about self-reflection. The beautiful thing when you start to self-reflect is you start to grow as a person. I would use scents, as in smells, not Canadian. And I would use music. So if I was having a bad day and I thought like one of my favorite songs would snap me out of it, I'd put on one of my favorite songs. I'd listen to some music. It'd, boost me up a little bit and I'd go about my day. If, however, it was more serious than that, and there are some days, it's ups and downs, highs and lows, a meander of emotions when you're healing it. You could have 2 weeks where you feel great, and then suddenly one day hits you and you're awful, and you're like, where'd that come from? I was fine. I've regressed. No, it's just the roller coaster ride that is healing and growth. And so if I felt on this particular day putting on my favorite song wasn't going to help me, I would decide not to stain it with misery, because your mind will make associations with smells and sounds. And I thought the last thing I want to do is ruin one of my favorite songs on one of my most miserable days. So I put on a song that I hated. I put on a song that I disliked, and I'd sit there and I'd go, this song is awful. Now I feel worse. And I'd have a good cry.
Yeah.
And then afterwards I'd feel a bit better. And I'd go, you know what? That's great. That's actually helped. And what it means is that some songs now that I used to hate, I now sort of weirdly like, because those moments, those low moments now, I can look back on almost with fondness, because I can, it's almost like I can thank them. Thank you for that low, because it's only with that low that I recognize where I am now is such a good place. Without that barometer, it's hard sometimes to tell how well you're doing.
Healing
and now
songs.
I really feel like I'm doing well.
The healing songs, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so I would do that. I would use aftershave. I would put my favorite song on and go for a walk in my favorite park. And then, maybe the next time I heard that song, it would transport me straight back to that happy place, to that moment in that park where, for whatever reason, my brain has clung to that one song in that one moment. And I'm back in that nice place, and it works. And as soon as I started to heal and became a nice person, I met the most amazing woman. And that woman has undoubtedly transformed my future from one that was destined to be a struggle to one that is destined to be successful and filled with hope and love and light and joy. And it's only through me doing the bits that I did at first and being willing to continue to work on myself that my relationship with her has remained a possibility, because she has a high bar. I was surrounded by people that had known me at my worst and were now looking at me and saying, Rick, you're smashing life. You're doing these talks and you've been on this TV program and you're doing this and you're doing that. You're smashing it. And she came along and she went, that behavior is not good enough. And I was like, what? What do you mean? I'm great. No, am I not great?
Yeah.
And she was like,
Lots of work to do.
Not compared to the men in my life, And I was like, shit, right. If I want to make this work, there is no end. It's the first time I realized there is no end to growth. There's this beautiful cartoon that I saw once, as in like a still drawing. And it was one friend pointing accusatory at the other friend and saying, you've changed. And the person just calmly replies, we're supposed to. And I just think it's a beautiful way of looking at life. It is only through change and growth or through change that we can grow. You have to face adversity. It's through adversity that we have the opportunity for growth. And it's through facing our challenges and having an interest in changing that we are able to facilitate that growth. And, she's helped me do that. And I will forever be thankful. And for the very first time in my life, I have an actual functioning relationship that isn't filled with the trauma me from childhood or adulthood, and it's great.
Just I've only known you for a very short time, and from the story to how you are showing up today, what a transformation you've made in your own life. And I'm sure there's so many people to thank for that transformation, but truly it's your hard work to put into that, right? So
thank you.
Incredible. What's one thing you'd love to leave our listener with today that you would feel remiss, you'd feel sad to not share with them today?
So if we've got the time, there are three things.
As long as you got the time.
Yeah, I've got the time. So 3 things. So the first thing is about hope. And this is a genuine real life experiment conducted by a Harvard graduate professor called Dr. Richter. He conducted this experiment in the 1950s, and it was with a rat in a bucket of water. Now, what he did is he filled the bucket of water and then he put the rat in, and he timed to see how long the rat would swim for before it gave up and started to drown. And the rat started to drown at 15 minutes. So at that point, the professor took the rat out of the bucket, put it back in its cage, fed it, let it recover, gave it some time. He then took the same rat, and put it back in the same bucket of water a second time and timed it to see how long it would swim for. And the second time, the rat swam for 60 hours. From 15 minutes to 60 hours. It just kept going. And he was genuinely baffled. And as I said, this is a genuine experiment. I urge your viewers, your listeners to look it up. He was baffled. How can a rat go from 15 minutes to 60 hours? And the scientific conclusion he came to was the rat had hope. Because a hand came in and pulled the rat out the bucket the last time it was drowning, it believed that if it just kept swimming, that hand would come back in again. And so it's important to realize in life that sometimes we're the rat and sometimes we're the hand. We have to be smart enough and brave enough to know which one we are at any given time.
Love that. Yeah.
So the second thing is a made-up story, but I love the concept. It's what I call the blue balloon theory. So there's the teacher at school, and he inflates a blue balloon and puts it on every student's desk. And the students all come in and sit down, and he says, right, in front of you, there's a pen. Write your name on your blue balloon. So every student does this. Then he says, right, everyone out into the corridor. So they all leave and all go out into the hallway. The teacher then walks around the classroom and jumbles all the balloons up, pings them all in the air, throws them around the classroom. So they're all mixed. And then he says, goes out into the hallway and says to the students, right, you've got 3 minutes, find your balloon, go. So these students all like barging into each other in a doorway. It's that comical thing where they're shoulder to shoulder and getting stuck in a doorway, and a couple of kids are tripping over stuff, and there's desks being knocked, and kids are picking up balloons and going, not mine, and throwing it away, not mine, and throwing it away. And after the 3 minutes, a couple of kids have got their balloon. Most students haven't. So the professor says, right, everyone drop your balloons back outside into the corridor. So he goes around and he mixes them all up again just for good measure. Goes back out into the corridor and he says to the students, you've got 3 minutes. At this time, I want you to pick up the first balloon you come to and hand it to the student whose name is on it. And within 2 minutes, every student in the class was holding their balloon. And he said, that's happiness. If you spend your time barging people out the way to try and find yours, it's going to be a hard task. If you spend your time helping people find theirs, invariably, someone will hand you yours. So think about the blue balloon. Perfect. And I thought it was I just thought it was beautiful. And the last thing that I'll leave you guys with, this is an analogy I really like to use, and it doesn't necessarily need to be about trauma. It can be about stress. It can be about whatever it's about, but it's about hardship ultimately. I guess hardship is the umbrella word that covers all things. I used to think it's about rocks in pockets. So I used to think that, you know, every time you go to a traumatic incident, it weighs you down a little bit. It's like a rock going in your pocket. And over time, you know, these rocks are heavy. And the more you have in your pockets, the harder it is to walk up a hill, walk upstairs. So you're being weighed down. And I used to think the goal was empty the pockets. That's the aim. Get the rocks out. How do we get the rocks out? And what I think now is, in actual fact, that hardship, be it grief or trauma or whatever it is, the actual idea is you can't do anything about the rocks going in the pocket. That just happens. That's life. You know, they go in. There's nothing you can do to stop that. But the longer you leave them there, rather than worrying about how to get rid of the rocks, just understand a simple thing. The longer you walk with those rocks in your pockets, the stronger your legs will become. And then those rocks feel a lot lighter. They're not. They're the same rocks. But you are much more able to carry them around because you've grown stronger. And that's the growth. That's the growth in walking with trauma. That's the growth in walking with hardship, walking with grief. When you lose someone you love, will it get easier? No, but you'll get stronger, which will make it easier.
Wow, it's powerful. Yeah, I've heard that analogy, and we use it all the time of, you know, putting rocks in your backpack. Same kind of analogy, but it's a backpack for us in North America. And we talk about it all the time, but we always talk about, you know, different therapies or modalities like somatic work or whatever that looks like, slowly start to take those rocks out. But I love your kind of different view on that, right? Of walking with that and making you stronger.
Yeah, exactly. And I guess you know, there's probably room in there with that analogy for both answers. You know, if you have the facilities available to go to counselling or open up to a friend, and that removes some of those rocks from the pockets, the backpack, great, do that. Yeah, but if you can't do that, remember that the longer you sit with that, the longer you walk with it, the stronger you'll get. So have faith for both options. So if you don't have access to counselling, keep the faith. You'll get stronger. You'll get through it.
Yeah, I would say this whole podcast conversations, if I could sum it up in one word, would be hope. 100%.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Definitely.
Rick, what's in store for you in 2025? Anything new and exciting in your life?
Well, there are a few bits and pieces going on. Some things I can talk about, some things I can't, some things I can sort of talk about. So in order to get back to a good spot with my son and I now are in a brilliant place. We've fully repaired our damage. I have gone back and I've apologized for lots of things. I've acknowledged my poor behaviors. I've given him the space he needed to forgive me. A lot of that has been because I've had help, and he's had help through a charity called Unlocking Potential. And what they basically do is a charity that's geared towards bringing children and families back together through times of trauma. Wow. So they went into my son's school and gave him counselling. They also gave me a 12-week parenting course. Now, as a man, that was a tough ask. I did not want to admit that I'm failing so badly at being a parent that I need someone to teach me how to do it. You don't ever want to admit that. But my word, what a game changer. It was incredible. And so after doing all of this work with them, I then wrote them a really good review. And based on the contributions I gave in the sessions, and then I guess the review that I wrote, they then contacted me and said, look, we don't have an ambassador. We've been thinking about finding one. Would you like to jump on board and become our first ambassador? And I said, I absolutely would love that. Whatever you want me to do, I'm there. So my job now is to go along and tell stories about me and Charlie and how I've sort of failed as a parent, and then how I recovered the situation, how Unlocking Potential were pivotal within that, so that we can get people to part with their money. And we're looking for like philanthropic investment. So people that are super rich that, need a tax break and want to give some money away, give it to us, please. Kids need this. And it's my job to emotionally blackmail them, I guess, into parting with their hard-earned money. But as part of all of this, it came to light that, and I can't say who, but there is a very big band that donate money to this charity, but want to remain anonymous. I created a post regarding me and Charlie and shared it for a part of an advertising campaign for the charity. The band then saw this and asked for their thanks to be passed on to me. And then said, gave me a little bit of a, keep doing what you're doing. You're really helping people. Thanks for what you do. And I was blown away by this because the band are huge. And so I then hatched a little plan, and I said, well, as I do spoken word and poetry, why don't I work on a little project with my son where we get to go to a recording studio and we're going to record. It's not written yet. The concept is there. We're going to write and record a spoken word conversation between me and my son, where I talk about moments in time and how it felt for me, and he talks about those same moments in time, but how they felt for him. I then apologize for the bits I get wrong. He then forgives me, and we then thank Unlocking Potential for the help that they gave us in arriving at this place. And we're going to do it to one of the songs that the band have written. So we had to obviously consult with them and say, can we have permission to do this? They came back, and very smartly, I would say, bearing in mind they don't know me, they came back and said, do one version with our song and one version without. So that's, I guess, their way of saying, if it's awful, we'd rather our song not be associated with it, which is fair enough.
Totally.
So my son and I have this amazing project to start working on imminently, where we're going to get to go to a recording studio and professionally record this spoken word piece. So that's very exciting. I'm just about to be taken on by a management company. So they're going to be doing the legwork of going out there and getting me speaking gigs, which hopefully opens up a much wider audience for me. Because at the moment, I'm sort of chasing what leads I can, but I'm also, limited exposure means when I go to a company, say it's IBM or Apple, and say, pay me a huge sum of money for me to deliver a conference at your AGM, for me to deliver a talk and motivate your teams, they'll go, who are you? When we could have all of these different people, who are you? Whereas now I'll have someone fighting in my corner to say, this is who this person is. this is why you should have him. And it sounds better coming from someone that isn't me.
For sure.
So I've got that going on. And then I'm hoping to be over in either the States or Canada at some point this year. I'm working on a little TV deal because I have a project that I didn't start. I've kind of jumped on board with, again, as an ambassador. A friend who's a firefighter from Buckinghamshire. He started this to come up with this concept called the Gratitude Games, which is basically an Olympic Games style event for emergency services and their families. It will be 20,000 competitors over a month of competing in the city of Manchester at the National Stadium. And it will be 20 different events. And the money we raise from the games will go into through existing charities, but will be set aside from us to go to all emergency service workers to provide a tailored and immediate bespoke mental health service. So that when you go to a terrible incident and you need immediate help, you're not in a 6-month queue waiting for a space to open up. You start the next day, and we'll be able to provide that. So, sorry?
So that's huge.
Yes, it's absolutely massive, and we're working on getting it off the ground at the moment. So what we're hoping is to put on a big concert in the UK to raise funds. We're talking with someone about that. And we're also hoping to, I'm hoping to be in the UK and then, as I said, States or Canada, filming a documentary for a TV production company about mental health in firefighters. I've got a friend over in the States called James Gearing. Don't know if you've heard of him. He's on the Behind the Shield podcast.
You betcha.
He's working a lot on this 48-hour working shift to provide better mental health for firefighters. He's trying to get that implemented. We want to kind of piggyback that a little bit and jump on that. And if we can, interview a few firefighters from States and Canada to try and get a perspective on that and try and raise awareness for people all over the world. You know, there are the obvious things that firefighters struggle with in terms of going to traumatic incidents, but that's not, that's the tip of the iceberg in terms of the struggles we face and the things we have to overcome. So I want to bring light to all of the other bits, all the bits that people don't think about, like what I call a trauma map, as an example. I literally drive around London now that I'm out the fire service. I still drive around London, and I will make my way around London via trauma spots. Oh, I remember that road. That's the road where we went, where that motorcyclist crashed into the lamppost and had open heart surgery and died. I was like, right here. Mm-hmm. That's where that helicopter crashed into that skyscraper, blah, blah. I find myself navigating London by trauma points. Mm-hmm. And these are things that shouldn't exist, but that do. And it's important that people realize, another phrase I coined is firefighters leave incidents, but the incidents don't leave us. And that has remained true for me, even though I've left now. I've been out the service for 2 years. It's remained true. Whilst I'm healed or fairly well healed, still healing, but fairly well healed, I could still, if I could paint you a detailed picture of every dead body I've ever seen. I don't think that's ever going to leave. What's changed is how that affects me. I'm in control of how that affects me now. So I've got control back, which is massive. But it doesn't stop those images from being there. Anytime I want to recall them, I can. They're just not intrusive anymore. So I want to highlight all of that stuff. So the documentary is hopefully going to get off the ground, filming this year, hopefully. Should find out in the next few days whether this company that we've pitched to are going to take it or not. And if not, we've got lots of others that are potentially interested. So I'm fairly confident it will happen. So watch this space, I guess. I might be back in touch with you at some point to come and
I'd love to
see you where you are.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like you're thriving. Like you said, you're still healing, and I think all of us are still healing, right? Even those who maybe haven't experienced that they're actually going through a traumatic emergency in their life, they are healing every day, right? So it's a process until we take our last breath, for sure. And
Exactly
your trauma mapping, that totally rings a bell, because a good friend of mine who's a fire chief in the East Coast talks about the crosses that we see on the side of the road when somebody has a car crash, somebody dies. That cross is there for the family, and it brings, it brings on an element of them to not necessarily worship, but kind of remember that person. But for first responders, every time we drive by those crosses, it's boom, we're right back to that car crash, right? So
yeah. Smells, sight, sounds, a lot straight back there.
Yeah. So that trauma mapping, what an interesting concept. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, brother, it's been a truly honor to sit down and hear your story and hear your recovery and your strength that you've brought to the world. And thanks for sharing it with the world. It sounds like you're thriving. Sounds like you're doing amazing things. So thanks for being brave. Thanks for being vulnerable. And thanks for all the hard work you put into yourself so you can share it with the world. Much appreciated.
Welcome, and thanks to you for giving people like me the platform to share our stories, so that we've got a wider scope, bigger chance of helping more people. It's working together as we would have had we ever served together in a fire service, working together, everyone dropping their stones in that pond at the same time and having those ripples overlap. That's what's going to heal the world. So thank you for giving us that space.
Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure. Well, hopefully everyone enjoyed this amazing episode. Definitely a very touching story about the whole the fire situation, that awful June 2017 day. But I think hopefully everyone listening right now, you got a lot of value out of the power of hope, power of recovery, and just listening to the inspiring words of our brother Ricky here from across the pond. So until next time, stay well. All right, that's a wrap.
Thank you for tuning in to Beneath the Helmet. We hope that this podcast has provided you with valuable insights into the world of firefighters' health and wellness. Remember, caring for your physical, mental, and spiritual well-being is crucial to achieving optimal performance. Join us next time on Beneath the Helmet for more inspiring conversations. Until then, stay well.